Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Buy, Sell, Hold Spotlight presented by Sports Car Market Magazine. I'm Darin Roberge. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Also, be sure to join in the conversation and share your thoughts by leaving us a comment below. Our guest today is SCM contributor Michael Leven. Welcome to the show, Mike.
No, thank you, Darin. Glad to be here.
For those who may not know you, why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Well, like most people in the hobby, I grew up in a car family. My father was a hot rodder from the 50s to start off with, and eventually got involved in other aspects of the car business, and then eventually came to own several car dealerships and ran a professional racing team. I was part of the team back in the 80s, and professionally, I'm actually a winemaker, but I've been writing for Sports Car Market for the last 11 years and have come to feel like I understand the market pretty well.
So we're here to talk about Arizona this week. So going into Arizona Car Week, what do you think the market questions and concerns need to be answered are?
Well, I think that as I've mentioned before, I think the key is going to be, where's the market going to go? I think that we're at a real crossroads as far as the economy goes and inflation and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, hard assets have always been a good investment for a lot of people during these kinds of times. It's going to be a strong showing this January, or whether it's going to be soft, I don't know. And I think that that's kind of what I'm looking forward to as things unfold.
There's certainly lingering questions. And as you stated, you look traditionally back at economically challenging times. 2007, the collector car market boomed. The early 2000s, when we had recession issues there, the collector car market boomed. But this said, there are some different components, including things like interest rates and so on and so forth, that are playing a part of that. Another piece of this puzzle here is auction houses that are either selling less cars, doing less days, or have stayed on the bench entirely this year. What effect do you think that's going to have overall?
Well, again, that leads me towards the idea that this is maybe going to be a soft kind of week. I don't know that. Again, we all have to see, because none of us have a crystal ball. But I think that what's going to be interesting is to see, I think it'll be a harbinger for the rest of the year. We're going to set the tone here in the coming week, and it'll be interesting to see where it lands.
Another factor to consider as well was the momentum of Barrett-Jackson's 50th anniversary sale in 2022. Clearly, they brought out huge guns for that, and we're full speed ahead there. Can they carry that momentum into this year, or are we going to see something a little more normal, or is there going to be a lull? Like, what do you think is going to happen at Westworld?
Well, I think that the 50th anniversary event is going to be a tough act to follow. Barrett-Jackson always is chock full of great cars. There's no question that we're going to see a lot of great cars. There's plenty of cars at which would be a feature in anybody's collection. They're out there.
Yeah, they've got some outstanding stuff over there. One other component of Barrett-Jackson I always find interesting is that they aren't necessarily always a totally correct indicator of the marketplace. As they've done a brilliant job of marketing their product, they kind of exist on their own island, where things that happen at Barrett-Jackson maybe don't happen other places. Things we've seen with Fox body Mustangs, with square body pickup trucks, things of that nature do exceptionally well there and struggle other places. Do you think the sort of island market kind of that Barrett has built around themselves will protect them through this?
I do. And it just gets to the fact that they've built such a strong brand. And frankly, the reason they've been able to do that is because they always have a great show. And it's said a million times, but every time I go to Barrett-Jackson in person, it's always striking to me that it is a great car show.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an aspirational bucket list type of event for virtually every car guy on the planet, and I don't expect that to change now or anytime soon. So good job to them on that. Another thing that they've done very well is cultivate entry level and new buyers and welcome new people into the hobby. What do you think that they're going to buy this year? I mean, last year they were buying pickup trucks, they were buying Fox body Mustangs. Broncos have been really popular for the last couple of years. Where do you think the new money coming into the marketplace is going to go?
What you're seeing is people have always bought their cars of their youth, or cars that were significant to them when they were still in the aspirational phase of their life. And now we have people making good money, and they're going to chase those cars. So I think that cars from the 80s and newer, I think, are going to be really strong. I think, just like we've seen in other auctions, I think that the modern supercar is going to be very strong. But there's also, there's Miuras, there's F40s, there's all sorts of wonderful candy out there that are more mainstream and kind of the stock in trade of sorts for a lot of younger collectors. I think that they're still going to be strong.
Yeah, I would agree with that most definitely. People are going to buy what they've dreamed of their whole lives. And we've seen that recently with things like Ferrari 328s and so on, down in, most recently at RM in Miami. That car absolutely knocked it out of the park, and M3s in the Munich sale that they had there as well. The dealer world and the auction world are clearly different, but they do tend to intersect, and they intersect heavily in things like Scottsdale Car Week. A lot of dealers have been sitting on inventory that's maybe a little bit softened or so on, and maybe looking to unload. This is a good opportunity for them to do that, but there could be some complications there. Where do you think the dealers are going to fit into Arizona Car Week 2023?
Well, I think that there's a flip side to one of the points you just made, in that, yes, they're sitting on old inventory that might be hanging around for a little while. Things might be a little softer on those cars, but you got to look at this. If things do turn out to be a little bit on the soft side, it's also a wonderful buying opportunity for the dealers.
Yeah, no doubt. And there will be deals for both dealers and collectors and buyers alike out there. There should be a good buying environment in Arizona this year. Collections. There's quite a few this year. Let me give you kind of the quick rundown on what we've got. Bonhams, I believe, kind of has sort of one of the premier, more interesting ones. The John White Ram's Head collection, mostly made up of mid-century classics. But what really is special and interesting about that particular collection, and it has produced some star cars for Bonhams coming into Arizona Car Week, is the Chrysler Ghia case study cars. 3 of them there: 1957 Ghia Super Dark 400, 54 Chrysler Ghia GS1 Coupe, and 62 Chrysler Ghia L 6.4. These cars were New York Auto Show cars. They were major media magnets in period at some of history's most important new car shows back in the mid-century era. Where do you kind of sit on that? How do you think those cars are going to do? We've seen the mid-century big body classic cars kind of go down a little bit, but there's some really nice original stuff in here and some very rare things that are coming through Bonhams with this collection. Many of them no reserve. I kind of think like this collection may do pretty well. What are your thoughts?
I think that this collection will be a bit of a mixed bag because of exactly what you're talking about. I think that a lot of the cars in that collection are cars, American cars from the 50s. They're not necessarily things like Motorama driven or generated cars. There's in some cases just kind of, I don't want to say garden variety cars, but nothing really different. On the other hand, the Chrysler Ghia cars are, I don't think cars like that will ever go out of favor. They're so unique and they so define the era where what the styling is just so futuristic. The thing is that mindset that came out of the 50s, which was, we're still in the post-war glow. Everybody's looking toward the future. They're looking towards modernity. They're looking at things that are real defining kind of cars that say these cars were what drove styling and the mindset of the 1950s. Those will never go out of style. They're so unique.
Moving on to RM Sotheby's. They've got a really nice private collection as well. Mostly mid-century Italian cars. Few we'll talk about here moving forward. The appeal of the mid-century Italian supercars, I think, is universal. I think those are timeless cars that will probably never go away. How do you think this collection does?
Well, I like this series of cars, this collection of cars. When I was covering Gooding for the magazine back in August in Pebble Beach, there was a super fast that sold for $6 million. It was a Super America. I don't remember which, but there was a Super America that sold for $6 million, almost completely original. that kind of car is aspirational because those cars were built for kings. They're always going to be, like you say, in fashion. And so I think this generation of the Italian cars, because you have things that come out of this generation like the Superfast. You get things that come out of there like the Miura. These are cars that will always be collectible.
Yeah, I agree. And the Superfast is really an interesting car. I mean, super low production. And it was kind of the beginning in a lot of respects of Ferrari kind of deciding who gets to buy their cars and who doesn't. You really had to be somebody to be able to, convince Ferrari to sell you one of those cars. And we'll cover that one a little bit more in detail later, but man, what a car that is indeed. Moving on to Barrett-Jackson, they've got several collections. The Bill Monday collection is mostly made up of classic Corvettes. The Boyd collection, a lot of classic Americana. The Excalibur collection is American customs and classics, including a couple cars that really caught my eye. 1979 Trans Am 4-speed WS6 special edition, one owner, super low miles, that awesome gold color. They've also got a 1970 Plymouth Superbird 4-speed with a 440 engine. Again, super low mile car. Very, very interesting. They've got the MS Classic Cars collection, which is primarily pony and muscle cars, including a Chevelle LS6, the 1966 Shelby Group 2 Mustang that was built for Ken Miles that you mentioned earlier. Northside Customs collections, a little bit of everything. There's a Porsche, there's a 69 to 70 Boss 429 Mustang. There's a 70 Hemi Cuda, and then the Chevrolet Camaro ZL1 that you spoke about earlier. Across the board, all no reserve. What do you think the difference is between a car coming from a collection that crosses the block versus just an individual lot by itself? Do you see an additional benefit to having the collection tag associated with it when it does go across?
Well, it's interesting because we just had Broad Arrow do an auction out of upstate New York, and the Taylor, who was the collector, was known very well for having really well restored and real unique cars in great condition. And in most cases, he could just go in and take one and drive it and use it without any great, fear of anything. Well, so what's going to go wrong? What's going to go wrong? It's a 70-year-old car, and God, what could go wrong, right? When you have people like that and they have a reputation, I think that coming from that collection, I think makes a big difference. Some of the other collections that maybe not as well known and the people behind those collections, they may have wonderful cars and they may be very fastidious owners, but it doesn't have, it may not have the marquee value of some other collections.
So, Mike, we're here to preview individual cars, so let's go ahead and jump into that. But before we go there, the pre-war segment seems to have cooled off a little bit. Jumping in, what do you think the hot segment is going to be in Arizona this year?
As I alluded to earlier, I really think that the newer cars are going to maybe surprise some people. I think that, something that you had mentioned in a previous communication where, has the C3's Corvette's time come? Well, let's be honest, of the Corvettes that you could buy as a collector, the C3 has been kind of, the tail of the dog, if you will. And I think you're right. I think that the C3 might be a really good one. And so I think cars of the 70s, tough. The 80s were tough. There weren't that many great cars. But I think the 70s, 80s, and 90s is really going to come to the fore. And it's not going to be a trend that people are saying, oh, look what's coming. I think it's going to be here. It's going to arrive once and for all.
Well, let's look at some individual makes and models here. Let's start with the cream of the crop, the top of the heap, and the gold standard for the collector car market. Let's talk Ferrari. So, Ferrari, have the classics finally reached their resting place? You know how cars kind of tend to go up and down a little bit, but then at some point they just sort of cost what they cost. Are we at that point with Ferrari now?
No. I don't think. I think the days of the $10 million, $12 million short wheelbase 250 may have come and gone. but I don't think it's going to go down. I think that those cars will always be desirable. And I think Enzo-era Ferraris will only become more dear as time goes on. We see LaFerraris. I think the estimate on one of the LaFerraris for sale is $4.5 million. Pretty stout money.
Those are pretty serious cars, no question about that. And I agree with you. I think that now they've kind of dipped and they're kind of back where they are. And the bottom line is that they're enormously special cars. I mean, they're quite likely the greatest class of cars ever built. And the market has known this and been aware of this for some time. So it comes into a situation where I think they are a safe buy now. I mean, you could have bought one a couple years ago and maybe done a little bit better, but it seems like where they're at right now is kind of probably where the floor is going to be. And we're going to see a jump there. What's the future going to lead to for things like 550s, 355s, 360s, et cetera?
Well, as somebody who's pined for a 360 for several years now, I watch the prices very intently. And I pick out the 360 because it's the first of the more large production, if you will, Ferraris that you didn't need to drop the engine out of every 3 years. And so I've always longed for those. They've been pretty solid. I keep waiting for them to bottom out, and I think they're bottomed out. I think that you can probably buy a decent 360 for maybe $100,000, but not a great one. And they're expensive cars to maintain, not as expensive, say, a 355. But on the other hand, even at $100,000, I think you're getting an awful lot of car for the money.
One thing that kind of parallels this a little bit is at RM Sotheby's this year. 1966 Ferrari 500 Superfast Series 2. It's one of 12 Series 2 examples built, one of 36 total built. It comes from prominent ownership, was restored by Paul Russell and Company, which means that the restoration was super high-end. There's nobody better with Ferraris than Paul Russell. Tipo 208 engine that combines the best elements of most of Ferrari's, legendary engines from the period. And it's a dark blue paint over cognac leather, which is beautiful. And it's been shown. It's been awarded at Amelia Island, Pebble, and Cavallino. So it's a known, vetted car at the highest level. How do you think this car performs?
I think these are cars that are so special and so rare that they're going to continue to do well. I think it's something that you can't go wrong with. And what always appeals to me of this this genre of Ferrari is it's really appealing to me to think that you could cruise at 120 miles an hour all day long and be comfortable and not get out of the car feeling like, you wore it. But when you get down to brass tacks, what are you going to use the car for? How are you going to use it? Are you going to wring every last tenth out of it on the racetrack? No. But boy, you're going to look like millions of dollars cruising down the boulevard in that baby.
Exactly. Moving on, we've got over at Barrett-Jackson, a 2001 Ferrari 550 Barchetta, formerly owned by Rod Stewart, a well-known supercar aficionado. We've obviously been watching him drive the coolest stuff in the world since forever. And this comes from his ownership. Number 92 of 448 Barchetta's produced. It's Nürburgring silver over black, which in my opinion is hands down the best color combination for that car. 5.5 liter V12 with a 6-speed manual, 485 horsepower. Here's the big one with this car on top of the previous enthusiast ownership is it had a service performed on it in 2022 and it has only 8,925 miles on it. This seems like a pretty solid car to dive into if you're looking to get into that era of Ferrari that we talked about.
I just think these are wonderful cars. They're great driving. Like I say, and not unlike the 500 Superfast, you can drive them for long periods. It's just a very usable exotic.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So let's talk the back at RM. Let's talk the original version, so to speak, if you would, of that. 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB 4 cam. Brilliant color combination. Again, same. It's a Grigio iteration, which I've said on the show a million times. I think is the best series of colors for Italian cars by far. 45-year ownership on this car, and it's almost entirely original. What do you think the originality factor is going to play into something like this? Obviously, a 275 GTB4 is at the top of everybody's list of something that you have to have as a car collector. You know, where do we see this car go?
I think the 275 is one of the most beautiful road-going Ferraris ever built. It's a classically styled car. I mean, it evokes the 250 GTO in its basic look, but it's just refined. And it's a beautiful car. And the fact that this one has all the right boxes with you, like you say, long-term ownership. And then you also have a largely original car. A car like this will always be more valuable tomorrow than it is today.
Yeah, I agree. That checks every box, and it doesn't get any better than that. Moving on to America's Ferrari. Shelby is always a major component of Arizona Car Week. The question remains, though, are these generational cars? Do you think these mid-century Shelbys will live on? There's certainly new cars that have been around for the last 10 or 12 years that are piquing younger buyers, but is it really the same thing? And will younger, newer buyers feel the same way about the classic Shelbys?
Well, I think that some of the things that are available this week are the Shelbys that people will be interested in. The Group 2 Shelby Mustang that was built for Ken Miles, that will always be a great piece of history, as well as being the ultimate version of the first generation Mustang.
Yeah, it's a pretty special car, and it's got a lot of stuff attached to it. Obviously built for Ken Miles. Never had a chance to drive it, but it did certainly live on and do lots of different stuff. That car is over at Barrett-Jackson. Another car that's really interesting from Shelby land over at Barrett-Jackson is 1968 Ford Mustang Black Hornet. It was built by Shelby as a tribute to the Green Hornet cartoon TV show. 428 Cobra Jet engine. It's got a 4-speed. It's EFI car. Tons of Shelby goodies, tons of upgrades, really super low miles, 564 miles on it. And it was in Shelby's personal collection for 40 years. I really like this car. I know it's been in market previously, but I think it's a really, really interesting look into the sort of personal tastes and creative desires that Shelby personally had for himself. And I think that this is an absolute must own for any serious Shelby collector. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think one of the things I like about the car is that it's not a fastback. And then I think that among collectible Shelbys, that's a real outlier. And I find the car very attractive. Even, I'm not a vinyl roof kind of guy in general, and especially in something that's so sporting, but everything's right about that car. And it's a real unicorn.
Yeah, I agree. One of one. Nobody else is going to have that car anywhere you go, any event that you participate in. Another incredibly special Shelby that has done a whole ton of stuff is over at RM Sotheby's. It's the Shelby Competition Cobra that they have over there. Super interesting car, Cobra caravan car. So it was a main press car that traveled around and did all that stuff. Allegedly the most photographed Cobra of all time. In addition, it was in an Elvis Presley movie, which is pretty amazing. And also it was purchased by a F1 driver, and it was raced with him in period also. So the question remains is kind of what hasn't this car done, and what do you think that's going to mean to potential buyers in Arizona?
I think that there will be an aura. There's always an aura around Cobras. This is a very special Cobra, and that's a creme de la creme kind of statement. And I think that the competition Cobras have always carried a huge premium over the street versions. And the fact that this one has such a wonderful history, I think it would be a cornerstone car for even a diehard Shelby collector.
Most certainly. And those cars are just brutal all the way around too. So even from the performance driving elements of it, it's pretty hard to go wrong. One that's maybe not as brutal, but still remains pretty interesting is over at Barrett-Jackson. 1983 Dodge Shelby Charger. Reason why I think this is a wild card is this was formerly owned by Carroll Shelby himself, and it was once displayed in the very prestigious Shelby American Collection in Colorado. Here's the kicker on this. It's got a madder than a Hornet in a Coke can powered 2.2 liter 4-cylinder engine with a 5-speed, whopping 107 horsepower. Comes a Santa Fe blue with the stripes, and it's the first model Shelby vehicle produced since 1970. I'm seeing online a lot of younger people on YouTube and on Instagram primarily that are suddenly starting to show interest in some of these Dodge Shelby cars, this car, the pickup truck, etc. Not performance monsters at all. Kind of cool looking, kind of different, has the Shelby legacy involved with it. Where do you think these cars go? Is there any chance for something like this?
Yeah, I do think they are. And the thing is it's not a flash in the pan, because Bonhams sold one at Scottsdale 2 or 3 years ago that I don't recall what it sold for, but I remember it was slightly shocking. And there was some resonance. There's some resonance there because, like you say, it's the first car in a long time, but it is a Shelby. It's a real deal Shelby, and it's a limited production car, and it will. I don't think it's going to light the world on fire, but I think it'll be strong.
Yeah, I think the future looks bright for those cars. Obviously, muscle cars and pony cars are what Arizona Car Week is largely known for. American muscle in general is very, very popular in Arizona. So what are we expecting to see there? And where does Arizona Car Week 2023 leave the muscle car market?
Well, I think that we're going to see eventually, maybe not this particular sale, but eventually we're going to see the 60s muscle car market maybe fade a little bit over time, just because cars like this can be generational. And I think that, as we've talked about earlier, I think that, as people age out from that generation, age out of the hobby, I think that that's where it's going to end up starting to get soft.
I'm not sure I 100% agree with that. I mean, I think we will see a drop off a little bit. However, there's two components to me that say a little bit to the opposite, and maybe muscle has a little bit longer lifespan to it. Is number one, the participation of muscle cars in media. You look at music videos, it's always muscle cars or it's exotic cars. If you look at, movies like The Fast and the Furious, there's a major muscle car component to that. But addition, I think the manufacturers have tried to keep the muscle thing going longer. And as a result, we've seen things like the new ZL1s, the Hellcat, et cetera. Where do you think that the late model sort of tribute versions of the classic muscles leave the classic muscle segment? Do you think this is going to contribute, or am I off base here?
No, I think that's part of what helps keep the market afloat, is the fact that we keep building these looking back cars, and Detroit is still building them.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's going to be a component for sure. Some great cars in Scottsdale this year, as always. Let's start right at the top here. For me, the car that really jumped out at me at Barrett-Jackson, sort of overall, was a 1969 Chevrolet Copo Camaro. There's two of them over there. This one is lot 1339. This car is special for a number of reasons. Obviously, my matching numbers, original drivetrain, documented, etc. L72 427 with 425 horsepower. It's a 4-speed car, which is a little less rare. Depending on who you are, it's probably maybe more desirable. I don't know if you're a driver, if you're a collector. But the color is phenomenal. It's burnished brown, which is incredibly rare and looks smoking on that car. The big one though is it's the only Van Nuys Copo produced. Obviously, all of the Copos were produced in Norwood except for this one, and it's got COAs, NCRS shipping report, build sheets. Interesting ownership history as well. It was owned by Kenny Loggins' manager. So, who knows where that car went and what it saw. And it's low mile, 47,000 mile car. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, again, it's a special car. I don't know how much the Kenny Loggins Association is going to help it.
It's in the danger zone. Come on.
I like the guy's music, but I don't know that, again, the association is going to be less and less important as time goes on.
Indeed. But maybe another car that might be even more important to that is also at Barrett-Jackson, 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1. What do you think on this car?
Well, frankly, it's an absolutely drop dead gorgeous car in black with the black Steelies and the poverty dishes, poverty hubcaps. I think it's spectacular. The fact that it's been recently reunited with its original engine, I think, is a huge component. And again, it's a generational car, and it was kind of built for one thing, which is going fast in a straight line. So I think it's going to have a lot of appeal. I think it's going to go for big money. I think that the market is still strong for these really special muscle cars.
Another really special muscle car is over at Bonhams, 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda hardtop. Obviously, every 71 Hemi Cuda is important, but this one does everything and more. Dual four-barrel carb car, 426, 425, obviously, one of 60 four-speed pistol grip cars. Here's what I love about this car is it's been in the same family ownership, purchased new by the consignor's father, but it's a rare European delivery from new. And allegedly, it's the only new Hemi Cuda delivered to Europe, where it was campaigned in prominent period racing events over there. High-end restoration carried out by Lloyd Lind. Obviously, he's a specialist. We know his work well. I think that car, it can be a big-time star this year in Arizona. What do you think?
Yes, I agree with you. We've seen cars like this go in the millions. Don't know where this one's going to land, but like you say, these are so rare, and they're, again, harking back to an earlier comment, Chrysler is still harking back to that Hemi myth, or not myth, but Hemi legend, in their current marketing. And so I think that helps cars like this a lot.
Another big piece of Arizona Car Week year in and year out is the Corvette market. This year, we're looking at a little bit of a shift. Is it finally time for the C3?
I think it could be. I think that unfortunately, the C3 suffers from the fact that it was restored, if you will, or modified in horrendous ways in period when they became just used cars. And I think that we probably worked through a lot of those cars, and their value has increased enough for people to put them back to a stock configuration. They're beautiful cars. The early chrome bumper cars are beautiful. You start to get a little wonky when you start to get into, past 73. But the early ones are absolutely gorgeous cars, and they're the build quality back in the day probably wasn't all that great, but they're still going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. And I think that people are going to start to see the market for these start to strengthen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my personal favorite all-time Corvette, 1969. I think they got everything right that year. But I think more so than anything with Arizona this year, the biggest set of C3s that I've seen come to auction, certainly one of them is of all time. Could potentially be of all time. We'll start right and move our way up here. Incredibly special car over at Bonhams, 1971 Chevrolet Corvette ZR2, which is the sort of big block example version of the ZR1. 454 LS6 V8 engine, 425 horsepower. It's got a 4-speed Muncie 422, M22 rock crusher, 4-wheel independent F41 suspension, a quick car, 4-wheel heavy-duty powered disc brakes, one of 12 produced. And that's not even the rarest car there. In addition, prominent ownership, ordered to use in the 1971 Targa Floria. It's got extensive documentation from new. 2 owners since 1975, and it's been with the current owner for 45 years. This car is also no reserve. Amazing car.
Yes, and I was real partial to this because my dad had an LT1 back in the early 70s, and they're really wonderful cars. Now, the big block doesn't drive quite as sprightly as the small blocks, but this is a extremely rare car, and it's early enough where the styling is still very pure, and very unusual that it would be taken to Europe to race back in the day.
Yeah, it's an amazing car, and it's not even the biggest C3 that is in Arizona this year. RM Sotheby's. Get ready for it. 1969 Chevrolet Corvette ZR1 convertible. Absolute bucket list car. One of 2 produced. It's a convertible. It's Monaco orange black interior. Documented everywhere. These cars are super interesting for a couple of reasons. Obviously, everybody knows the L88 and what an absolute monster that is. I mean, that's a $700 to $1 million car right there. If you go back to the original day on these cars and try to purchase one, That was about $1,000 option over the biggest, most expensive Corvette you could get at the time. This car, which you had to buy the L88 in order to get the ZL1 option, was a whopping $3,000 over the price of what the L88 was. So you had to buy the L88 option, then you bought the ZL1 option, which made this almost twice as expensive as the base price of a standard Corvette in era. Now, the two major components of this car, which I think will make it go absolutely insane, and I think the estimate of $2.5 to $3 million on it is probably appropriate, is this is the first Corvette ZL1 that has come to public auction in 30 years, and it's the first convertible that has been publicly offered ever. What happens with this car?
I think that it's any really big Corvette collector is going to be bidding on this car. It is, if there is a true unicorn, this is it. And I think that cars like I say, cars like this will never go down in value. They're so rare and so special, even in the day, like you say, twice the price of a Corvette. And I recall I think my dad paid $4,000 or so for his Corvette in 1972, and to be stacking another $4,000 in options on a $4,000 car, you start to see why it doesn't sound like a lot of money by today's standards, but that was some serious money. I mean, what you could buy for $8,000 would probably surprise most people back in the day. This is top of the line Ferrari kind of money.
Yeah, enormously expensive, enormously special car. And in fact, the matter is just seeing a ZL1 Corvette in the wild is a special thing. The opportunity to buy something like this, absolutely once in a lifetime. Moving on to Porsche. This year, we've got 3 Carrera GTs that are in the desert. They've appreciated incredibly in the last year. Complete explosion on the price of those cars. Have we reached the top on Carrera GTs?
No. They lagged for so long. They've finally broken out in the last 12 months, 24 months. And I think that for what that car is, I think that it looks like a pretty good bargain at $1.5 million to $2 million when you look at what that kind of money buys you alternatively.
Yeah, it's a lot of car. It's the last chance to really have a fully crazy analog type car that wants to kill you. Hard to do better than a Porsche Carrera GT. And it's hard to do better than the 2005 Carrera GT over at RM Sotheby's. This is my pick for the best one. One of 644 US delivery cars, obviously one of 1,270 built total. I like the color combination on this, gray seal over terracotta. It's got some miles on it, but bear with me on why I like this car. 12,921 miles, but it's a ready-to-go car. It's been serviced. There's no stories. Service done by Porsche north of Scottsdale in November of 2022. This car is a car you can get in and you can actually use, whereas the other two maybe are a little bit going to require some things or maybe have had some stories involved. However, Barrett-Jackson has a very interesting one also. It's another 2005, obviously. This one's guards red, but it was painted a custom color that way. Came apart, done the right way, done professionally. What do you think the difference is going to be here between a sort of no stories vetted car that has some miles on it or a car that's maybe been done in a little bit more special capacity like the one at Barrett-Jackson?
Well, I think that back in the day when our family had a couple of Porsche dealerships, I was interested to learn that some inordinate number, percentage of Porsches either were bought in silver, black, or guards red. And if you go back and look at the Carrera GT, I can't remember offhand what percentage of them were painted silver, but it was at least 50%. And so I think that original or not, I think that a guards red Carrera GT looks pretty sexy to me.
Moving on to Mercedes-Benz. They were kind of the kings of the castle last year in Arizona, but there seems to be a few less really prominent Mercedes here. However, one thing that is present in a couple of different examples here in the desert this year is Pagodas. And Pagodas are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful cars. And they have blown up. These were $100,000 cars a couple years ago. Now they are worth significantly more if they're the right car. What do you think about the Pagoda market?
Well, I'm very bullish on just the SL generations of generational cars. I owned a 280 SL. My mother owned it for 36 years before I bought it. I owned it for 12 years. They are absolutely great, highly usable cars. They're kind of starting to get into that last bit of the hand-built Mercedes. And the thing was bulletproof. And they drive wonderfully. They're fast. They're modern, sort of. And they're really, it's just, if you just look at the pricing, it's the next version of what was the 300 SL, the 190 SL, and then the 230, 250, 280 SL. I just wrote a piece for the magazine about the R129 generation, which is after the Pagodas, and then the 450 SL, 560 SL, that generation, the R107 generation. The R29 generation, this time has come. You can buy them for $10,000. You can buy it for $20,000. You can buy a really good one for 30. And these are 300 horsepower cars. I think that anything that says Mercedes SL is forever.
I love these cars. I got to be honest. I think they're great driving. They're beautiful to look at. The gauges on them are intoxicating. Hard to sort of take your eyes off them when you're driving it and look at the road because they're so beautiful. And you're right. They're usable. They're reliable. They keep up with modern traffic well. And I understand the appeal and the collectability. For me, in the desert this year, the top one is at RM Sotheby's 1969 Mercedes-Benz 280 SL. Well preserved, meticulously owned with original owner for 50 years. 33,000 original miles on it. It's a beautiful color combination of dark olive over cognac, matching dark olive hardtop, recently inspected by Mercedes-Benz. It's got records going back to new, window sticker, bill card, factory toolkit, owner's manual, service booklet, etc., etc., etc. This car has absolutely everything. One thing it doesn't have, and I don't think it's going to hurt this car, is this is an automatic version. I know the manual transmissions tend to be a little bit more desirable in these cars for a number of reasons, but for me, I really like the automatic because this car isn't really a race car. This is a boulevard car. This is a car that you take your lady to dinner in. I mean, this is a beautiful, smooth, slow driving car, in my opinion. And I prefer the automatics. What's your opinion there?
Well, I think that the manual transmission obviously commands a bit of a premium across the spectrum of Pagoda, the 250, 230, 250, 280. But I think that by the time you get to the 280, the need for a manual transmission has faded a little bit. The 230 is maybe a little underpowered. A manual transmission is going to give you a little bit more sprightly performance. But like you say, these are not sports cars. But boy, I'll tell you what, and I can speak from personal experience. When you drive one and pull up to the valet, like you said earlier, you get pole position in the parking lot.
We've got British cars in the desert as well. This year seems like there's a lot of sort of interesting models and choices to be made with British cars in Arizona. Primarily seeing a lot of late 70s, early 80s cars. For me, I really like Aston Martin V8 cars from that era in particular. It seems like a Mustang that developed the way that we wanted it to develop versus the way that it actually developed. Aston Martin kind of figured that out, picked up the ball, ran with it, but they also made these cars powerful, beautiful, refined, fun to drive, very luxurious, super interesting cars. It's an interesting time for British cars. How do you think the late 70s, early 80s, et cetera? I mean, we're seeing XJSs start to appreciate now. Are they ever going to catch up to the mystical and wonderful times of the 1960s with British cars?
I don't think so. That's not to take anything away from the cars, however, because, they were sophisticated, but they were still kind of brutish. And it was a man's car. And I think that to me is as much Aston Martin from that period. It defines the brand from the Sean Connery, and on, kind of mystique around Aston Martin. I think that these are good cars. They're undervalued. You're starting to see some pretty strong prices in that generation of cars. Because, are they as sexy? No. It's a really great looking Mustang, though. I think that's probably the best description I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I mean, they're good cars. I mean, Iron Fist in a leather glove, kind of like what you're talking about there. One in particular that caught my eye is over at Bonhams, and they've got a handful of pretty good cars from this era from the UK. This one in particular I really like, though. 1981 Aston Martin V8 Series 4 Oscar India car. I've driven a bunch of these Oscar India cars. They're neat. They're fast. They're comfortable. They're rare. Very cool. 5,300cc dual overhead cam V8, 4-Weber cars, 300 horsepower. Can you imagine a 300 horsepower Mustang in the late 70s, early 1980s? Aston Martin did it. They figured it out. 4-wheel independent suspension, 4-wheel disc brakes. And here's what's cool about this car. It's an original left-hand drive car sold in Texas, one of 20 Oscar Indias sold in the United States, a saloon model. And it's a matching number engine with a factory build sheet on it. Where does this car go? Is this a $100,000 car? Is it more? What do you think?
I think eventually it will be more. I think that as other Aston Martins start to price themselves out, that these will become more desirable, and desirable by necessity, because a lot of people can't afford the previous generation. But I think they're great cars. I think they're underrated. You mentioned the horsepower. I think that really what's frightening about my experiences in these generations of cars is the torque. They have a lot of grunt. And so you say, well, 300 horsepower, no, there's a lot of grunt in there, and these cars got up and moved.
As with every year in Arizona, there's always some interesting things to behold, and this year is no exception. My favorite coming out of the gates, 1952 Pegaso Z102, one of 83 Z102 chassis produced, one of 11 to wear the ENASA Berlinetta coachwork. Retained by the factory until 1955 for racing purposes, and then they used it to test superchargers, which is pretty neat. Numbers matching alloy block drive some 2.8-liter dual overhead cam V8. It's got an enthusiast ownership history, which I think with this type of car you would probably expect and would be really, really important. And it's been shown and vetted, best in class at Pebble, shown at Amelia Quail, etc. And here's why I think this car is going to perform beyond what the expectations are in Arizona this year. Pegaso is the featured mark for the 2023 Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. If you're looking for a car that basically will get your ticket punched right out of the gates for the Pebble Beach Concours, this one's going to do it. What are your thoughts on this car? It's an interesting little Spanish weird sports car, but it was also the fastest car in the world at the time, so it's got a lot of appeal.
Well, and I think what was interesting, if you look at if you think about it, to have a V8 that's sophisticated in the early 50s, this car was way ahead of its time. I mean, hemispherical heads. This car had everything, multiple cams. I think these are unusual cars, and I think that because of their rarity, I think that they'll always be great. I think that the fact that the parent company built trucks probably didn't help it necessarily back in the day, but I think these are as any car that would be the featured mark at Pebble Beach would be. These are landmark cars. And I think there's 2 of them available in Arizona this month. Not just the subject car, but I think that they're very desirable. And I agree with you that the enthusiast ownership speaks to the car's basic character. And it's a beauty. It's a real beauty.
Yeah, it's a beautiful car for sure. Another really beautiful car from that same time period over at RM Sotheby's, 1953 Fiat 8V Coupe by Ghia. This car is interesting for a ton of reasons, but the fact that it was never made into sort of their supersonic car that they were so well known for at the time period, I think kind of makes it more appealing to a certain degree and a little bit more interesting and rare. What are your thoughts on this car?
Well, I think that what I like about this car is that it's very classic in its styling, and it looks, if somebody didn't know what they were looking at and they said that's an early 50s Ferrari, they'd go, oh yeah, it echoes the lines of a 212 or something like that. I love the styling on this. It's got that beautiful round, voluptuous kind of style. The grill's a little bit big, but I kind of like that. And the fact that it's not a supersonic is the only one that's not a supersonic style from Ghia. And the fact that Virgil Exner had his hand in the drawing of this one, I think makes it very unique and very desirable.
Yeah, it's a neat car for sure too, and it's vetted. It's been everywhere. So if you're looking to go out and experience incredible collector car lifestyle type of events, this car will get you there. Another car that's really I'm in love with is not so traditional and not so subdued is the 2008 Spyker C8 Spider. One of 121 produced, one of 4 in yellow, one of 15 with the periscope rear view mirror, which is insane. Audi 4.2 liter 400 horsepower engine as seen in the R8 during period, documented by Mark Expert, 800 miles from new. These are crazy cars. Art Deco steampunk interior all over the place. The periscoping rearview mirror is totally insane. The exposed linkages are totally insane and very, very cool and artistic at the same time. And their Spyker's slogan is for the tenacious, no road is impassable. And that's just the best thing I've ever heard. It's my favorite supercar in Arizona Car Week this year. What are your thoughts on something like this?
Well, I think that this is a love or hate kind of car. I think that their styling, admittedly, is incredibly unique, and they got portholes, they've got all sorts of unusual styling techniques. I've never ridden in one, never driven one, so I couldn't speak to their road dynamics. But I was always wondering, well, gee, these guys haven't built very many cars. How good could they be? But it is certainly a statement.
Charity cars, they are a significant component every year of Arizona. We've got a handful here. Let's start from the top. 2024 GMC Hummer EV Edition. This is VIN number 001, which we've seen at Barrett-Jackson before, doing the first one. This one benefits the Tread Lightly LLC Foundation. 2024 Ford Mustang GT Fastback, same deal. First one, the VIN number 001. This one is for the JDRF, Juvenile Diabetes Research Fund. Got a couple celebrity offerings here too in Scottsdale. Colin Powell's 2015 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. That one's for America's Promise Alliance. And then a 2022 Ford Shelby Super Snake done by Counts Customs. That one is for the Freedom Inc. And then finally a 2023 Ford F-150 Lightning 4x4 Super Crew pickup. And that one is benefiting firefighters across the globe. Moving forward and out of the desert. Obviously, Arizona Car Week is known as the place that sets the standard for the marketplace moving forward for the upcoming calendar year in the collector car market. What are we expecting is going to happen here, Mike?
I think what's going to happen is you're going to start to see categories start to stratify a little bit. So, for instance, we alluded earlier to the fact that 70s cars, in particular, the C3 Corvette, are starting to see a little bit of movement in a positive way. I think that garden variety 70s four-doors and whatnot sell. If somebody offers you 5 figures, sell. It's the best price you're ever going to get. As far as buying, I alluded to it earlier. I think that any SL series Mercedes is going to be a future kind of collectible. They always are. You just have to look at the history. It's not rocket science. And I think that some of these cars are at the bottom of their depreciation curve, and I think that that's time to buy. The one that I've seen that's been interesting in the last 12 months, that's a hold, is I feel for all the Shelby S Series 1 people who bought back 10, 15 years ago, and kept the faith and said, someday it's going to be a collector car. Your time might be here. There were a couple cars that Barrett-Jackson sold last year for over $200,000. And, everything that I've seen in the sports car market database, that sold in 2022 at auction, sold for over $150,000. So I think we've kind of broken the ice there. I think that's a hold, because it'll never be the Cobra. It'll snowball's chance in hell if they'll even get close. But I certainly think they're going to finally get a little love.
Yeah, those are difficult cars, I think. I mean, the Oldsmobile Aurora engine on them kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense, I don't think. And they're not terribly refined either. I agree with you. I think the time to sell on those cars is definitely now. For me, Arizona looks a little bit dicey. It seems like inventory might be a little bit light. Some auctions have better things than they've had previously. Some have much less higher quality than they've had in the past. So I think to a certain degree that balances out. However, I think that some of the auction houses that are cutting days or that are sitting out this year are going to hurt the overall market. And I am a little bit concerned about how the major media sources sort of perceive that if they don't look into the details as to why that's happening. I think muscle cars will probably remain flat, exotics will go up, and 50 stuff will probably decrease. So where do you think the market gets left after Arizona? What are we looking for in the next 12 months?
I think the trends that we've been seeing will formalize themselves. And like I say, as the generations of car collectors get younger, I think so too will the cars that are desirable. I think that's a given. We talked about it being a coming trend. I think it's here. I think it's here to stay. I think you can just kind of formalize that dynamic. It's here. And to our earlier discussion, I think that's going to bode well for pricing on some 70s cars, not all. I think that 80s and 90s are coming, and I'm not talking about the original M3s and that kind of car. I'm talking about more mainstream type of cars. I think are going to gain value.
I would like to thank Mike Leven for joining us today. To learn more about anything that we discussed here, be sure to pick up the latest issue of Sports Car Market Magazine by visiting the link in the video description down below. As a reminder, if you enjoyed this content, please take a moment to like and share, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay on top of future episodes. I'm Darin Roberge, and thank you for joining us on this very special episode of the Buy, Sell, Hold Spotlight.